Yo, I'm going to go through and analyze a bunch of landings from my jump session with Chandler from last week. I'm making an accompanying video where I kind of talk about how a lot of these things work. So I'm going to be using terminology that if you don't get it, you should check the other part of this video. But let's just go ahead and get started. So this is a decent, I'm okay on this landing. It's decent horizontal landing. I get pretty good depth on that right leg and transfer that force forward. Not stiff at all, you can tell. I'm okay on the landing. Not in love with it, but it's fine for a forward landing. Forward landing is quite good. All right, here we have Chandler with a pretty decent horizontal transference here. Pretty good depth on his left leg, which he's going to be landing with first as he's jumping off the left, going to be coming down with the left too. And you can see not a very stiff landing. He transfers that force horizontally, so I like that. I like this landing. It's one of his better landings in here, I think. Here we have. I really like this. Nice squat landing. It's a vertical landing. You see me go down and spring back up with the horizontal element as well as, you know, I lower my center of gravity as low as I can and then move out of it while going backwards. This is the ideal way to land, and this is why it's just much better to start from a 90-degree angle, rotate 90 degrees in the air, and land 180 degrees backwards, because you just get to do a lot of nice squat landings. All right, here's a landing that I hate. It's a vertical landing with no depth. There's a decent amount of knee depth, but there's no hip depth. You got to get more hip hinge than this. You can kind of just look at the knees and tell that this is going to cause damage in the body, so nah, I'm not really a fan of this landing. Here we have a run-through landing. It's a horizontal transference. Decent depth on that right leg, and you can see that I turn this landing into just running straight backwards. Kind of landing in a backwards lunge type thing you can think about. And I mean, as far as horizontal landings go, I think this is pretty good. Okay, here we have a pretty good horizontal landing. Jumps off the left foot, lands on the left foot, and transfers back, going 180 degrees backwards. In general, you can see Chandler's one-foot jump landings are pretty good. They're generally horizontal landings like this one, which is a pretty good landing. Okay, here we have a squat landing, straight vertical landing, pretty nice, and you can see it's a bit of a cat landing, which is what I call forward landings. And when you have a forward landing, you generally are going to be putting your hands on the ground as an extra support to prevent your knees from spilling out forward, having a knee explosion. So you can tell I'm mad that I missed the dunk here, but I mean, I should be happy because it was a pretty decent landing and my knees are going to be totally fine as a result. Okay, here we have another nice one-foot run through by Chandler off of a one-foot jump. In general, you can see in this video, Chandler, your one-foot jumps or landings are much better and safer than your two-foot jump landings, so that's something we're definitely going to have to work on. Okay, here I get rim checked, which often causes a lot of problems in landings and creates not the best landing here. It could definitely be worse as I get decent depth and I turn it into a horizontal landing as well. So it was a decent bailout, so I'm glad that I didn't get injured here. Okay, here's what I'm talking about. This is a two-foot landing. It appears instead of running through, Chandler is landing on 2 feet and turning it into kind of a vertical landing, but getting no depth on it. So you can just check his knees right here. Yeah, just see that impact. It should not be like it shouldn't be visible the moment you hit the ground. Right, if you fall your head down from the landing, it should just be smooth all the way. If you don't see the ground, if the ground is cut off from your view, you shouldn't know that a landing even happened, if that makes sense. Okay, here's probably the best landing in the entire video. Now, my left leg doesn't get its heel on the ground. That's okay, it's primarily right landing. But dunk goes in, great depth, transfer it straight backwards. So I think that's my favorite landing in here. Here we have a run-through landing. Run-through landings are fine, or horizontal rather. Vertical landings are generally better if you can pull it off, but if you, in doubt, horizontal landings are a bit safer because your knees aren't necessarily going to explode if you take an off-balance squat and just get to depth. All right, here we have a bit of a rotational landing. It's pretty vertical too. You can see him bounce up, but if you follow Chandler's head here, it's pretty easy to identify the moment he hits the ground, as he doesn't really get any depth and immediately just bounces upwards, basically. So really not in love with that landing. Okay, here we have another squat landing. Something you're gonna be, or vertical landing. Something you're gonna be seeing is my left foot is going toe down to the ground. That's fine because the right foot is doing almost all of the landing here. That would not work if the left foot was the first foot to touch down. But you can see good depth at the right. The left comes in late, just as a kind of way the landing happens. So I'm happy with this landing. Here we have another vertical landing that doesn't have any depth. So my advice to Chandler is really go for, it's something that we're going to have to practice specifically. The 1 foot landings are pretty good. The 2 foot landings, there's no depth on these vertical landings. Okay. Here I bust my hand open, but combination depth into vertical, or vertical into horizontal, but you can tell that it's just unclear when I hit the ground if you follow my head. There's no moment where, there's no shock impact because it's just smooth. So in general, most of my landings are pretty good in this video, although there's going to be a few bad ones. Here's a really solid one. It looks like I get both heels on the ground in a straight squat landing, leaning a bit forward. However, on this one, so I do a bit of a cat landing, which you can see my right hand is on the ground to take some of that stress off of the anterior part of my body. So a decent horizontal landing. All right, here, if Chandler's going to be hanging on the rim, which is something that we're working to do, if you're going to be hanging on the rim, it's an opportunity to kill all your momentum and drop straight into a squat. So when you don't do that, it just wastes the whole point of hanging on the rim. I mean, definitely if you're getting up there, you should be happy about it, and you shouldn't really feel bad if your landings aren't good. It's just something to improve, right? So you can jump higher. So, I mean, here we have, basically no depth. Okay, so this is something I'll talk about. Since I'm landing backwards, a lot of the times if I'm rotating too fast or if I'm coming down too fast, it's totally fine to just land on my back because you can see all that force is already diffused, and then the hands come in and they push on the ground and keep something up. This is almost the best way to land. And a lot of people at the gym don't understand what I do when I do this. They ask if I'm okay. They think that I'm flopping maybe, and sometimes I get comments in my videos where people are like, you need to work on your landing, or your landing scare me and such. And a lot of that is the floor landings. But if you're landing into a squat backwards, if you're tipped over too much, that's totally fine, and it's totally fine to land on your legs, go into a deep squat, and then roll onto your back with the help of your hands. And you're going to see a few more angles on that in the video as the video goes on. Okay, go ahead back to what's going on here. Run through landing, not really the best. Okay, we have Chandler with his first two-hand hang ever, which is pretty cool, but he doesn't get any depth on this. Does a straight vertical landing without really any depth. And basically the issue with that is if you lift any weights, you know that you can lift a lot more weights, or you can lift a lot more, lower a lot more with a squat than with a calf raise. And when you're not getting any depth on your landing, you're trying to lower all your body weight and falling, diffuse all that energy from falling with the calf raise. Obviously, that's not a very good recipe for success. But when you fail, unlike in the weight room, you're not just not getting it off the ground, but all that energy is just going straight into your body, into injury. So calf lower rather is pretty weak. We really want to lower into a squat because the squat is extremely powerful. Go ahead and check what's going on with this landing. Pretty decent squat landing. Something you're going to see from all of my landings in general is my right foot comes down first. I jump off my right and the right comes down first. Chandler jumps off his left and the left comes down first, although he has a more variety of jumps. and that's generally the way it is. And since the left foot is joining later, the left foot is going to act a bit differently, and I think that it's fine if it's not a simultaneous both heel squat. It's, you know, it's a little more complex than that. Here we have a back run through. You can see the angle of a back run through. Decent landing. Yeah, just turn it into like a run. I mean, try to get as much depth as you can to transfer that. So I actually like, anytime I get a nice run through landing or a squat landing, I'm very happy. Although you're going to see a few bad landings in here. Here's a decent landing by Chandler, actually. He doesn't get very much depth in this. I mean, he gets a decent amount of depth. I'm still not in love with it. You'll see a bit of rotational force from him. Just a bit of a rotational landing. Well, reviewing it again, it's just kind of stiff. Although, if Chandler, if you're still watching this, and for those of you guys who are still watching, pretty long video, there's a really nice video by Chandler later on, a nice landing later on in this video. Okay, here we have a cat landing, a nice cat landing, probably the only true cat landing in the video. Cat landing is where you land forward facing and want to do a squat. Well, we all know that our knees can explode if they come out of our toes in a squat. So to make up for that, we put our hands on the ground and do a 4-point landing like a cat. So I actually like that landing a lot, although ideally I wouldn't even be landing forward facing very much anyways. Here's Chandler with a straight vertical landing. Just watch his head, basically. Watch his head, don't watch the ground. You can even cover it. You can, well, yeah, you can kind of just tell when that moment of impact happens. You want that moment of impact to be kind of a mystery, if that makes sense. It's hard to identify just because it's such a smooth transference. Here's kind of a weird one. It looks pretty smooth, and I think it was fine. I got a lot of depth on that right leg, but I kind of turned it into a horizontal landing, right? I go vertical to straight horizontal, kind of a skate move. It looks fine to me. It also went in, which is nice. But yeah, generally that right foot is going to be my first impact point of landing. Here, I mean, this is Chandler's best landing by far. This is 1 foot runs. It just 1 foot dunk just runs through it. It's just, this is a great landing. No need to improve this. Just good. But it's the 2 foot that's going to need the most work. Yeah, for example, like he's trying to do a calf raise right now, and you can see the knees just flare forward. Check out the knees, they go over the toes too. Chandler, you squat, man. You know that is a problem when your knees go too far forward. Okay, here we just have a run through, very smooth. I like it. Big hip hinge. The back's fairly straight on this. Good depth. The depth is coming from the hips, not from the knees. Hips, yeah. So I'm happy with that landing. Okay, I mean, it's just more of the same, I guess. So if you want to stop watching, that would be understandable. Although I'll tell you, there's going to be a few more landings in here that haven't been seen. In particular, there's one really good one from Chandler off the 2 foot that he is going to need to emulate, which I want to show you. Okay, here's a back view of the back landing. You see I go to land a squat here, but there's either too much rotation or whatever. So it goes right foot is the first point of contact, then the left foot, then the right hand, then the left hand, and then my butt, but I'm pushing off of both hands to slide me backwards. So it's very smooth. You can tell that my butt or glute is not actually hitting the ground very hard at all. So there's no real impact. It's a very smooth landing, actually. So that's the back landing, which I'm a huge fan of. I think it's totally fine to do. There it is. Awesome landing by Chandler. 1424 mark. So look at this. Great depth. Great depth. Just springs out of it. Makes the dunk too. Nice reverse. Great depth. And I love seeing this because up until I saw this, I was concerned that Chandler didn't even have it in his arsenal. And that would mean it would take a fair amount of intensive training to figure out how to do it. But you can see that he has the ability to do it. He's just not consciously thinking about it. So That's very encouraging. Great landing. Here we have a back view of the run-through landing. Pretty decent run-through landing. Good depth at the right hip. And just immediately go straight back into a run. Here we have a decent landing. I mean, he's hinging at the hips somewhat. His butt is still high. He's not getting anywhere near parallel. This is more of a deadlift landing than a squat landing, which is, I guess, preferable to a calf raise landing. Although squat landing is definitely the ideal. So I don't hate this landing. It's not horrible. Yeah, here's another view. This is probably the sweetest dunk in here by me. And you have a good view of how the back landing is going to go, of the slide. I'm creating a forward pushing sliding motion with the arms so that I go vertical and then arms push off, so I'm going horizontal now. So I'm just transferring that smoothly to the ground, and I just hit the ground in a slide basically. So I'm definitely in love with this kind of a landing. It's just a good way to go. It's a good way to not get injured, I think. It sucks that you have to, take the time to get up or whatever. Here we have a good run-through landing by Chandler. Nothing really new in this one. Ball goes in. Net pull-up. Totally fine. No, that's a rim pull-up, actually. Here we have... Okay, so sometimes the reason why I would go into a back landing is the rotation. You can tell the rotation is a lot more than 180 here. I go about an extra 45 degrees, which is... I'm going to be landing sideways almost again, which makes it very hard to land in a squat. Generally, to balance in a squat, I want to be going straight backwards, but I'm not able to do that here. Not in love with this landing. It's okay. It's step through. You can see it goes a bit horizontal here. Better than straight trying to do a calf raise, but could definitely be worked upon. All right, here's a combination. We go vertical into horizontal. You can see that my back is pretty straight during this. It's something that I could work on, but well, my back's bent. No, I'm not sure if I love it. But as you can see, the biggest hinge here is my hip. My back is straight-ish. My knees are not getting bent so much. Okay, nice dunk by Chandler. Let's check the landing out. Landing is okay. He channels it into a bit horizontal and rotational, rather than doing a calf raise. Not a horrible landing. Not very much. No, a decent amount of depth. That's a decent landing. Here we have me getting stuffed on the rim. No, it goes in. And doing a run through. You can also see me channeling that rotational momentum. I'm rotating, so why not land rotating as well? Which is definitely a way to go. I mean, you're either landing some combination of vertically, horizontally, and rotationally. Here's a good landing by Chandler. Actually, it's a rotational landing, as you can see. Well, he channels that rotational landing. No, I don't know if I'd say it's good. It's decent. He gets a decent amount of depth here. More depth than we were seeing earlier on. And it's okay landing. Here we have a bad landing by me. Finally a bad one. Well, I get rim checked, and I try to calf raise out of it. And there's times to do this. Generally when you're facing forward, but since I'm not facing forward, what's the point of trying to calf raise out of it? Just not very much depth. I mean, you're not going to get injured so fast doing it, but it adds up. Here we have a decent landing by Chandler. I like this one actually. You can see that he gets a decent amount of depth in the left leg and transfers it into the right. So he goes, turns a vertical landing into a horizontal landing here. You don't need to get as much depth if you go horizontal. Similar idea here. Well, I don't know if I love this landing. It's okay. I'll tell you it feels okay. I can keep my back straighter, but it's mostly, yeah, I'm getting decent depth, and I'm channeling that backwards into a running landing. Here we have another 1 foot by Chandler. It's a bit of an awkward landing as he's facing forward a lot instead of backwards, and that's the reason why this looks stiffer. So I mean, maybe go for a hang here, I guess. Okay, now we're getting to some where I'm not getting as much depth. You really want to mix it up. Squat landings are definitely ideal, vertical landings, and I mean, my horizontal landings are decent, but squats definitely ideal. Calf raise is like the worst, but there's times. This is a weird landing. It looks like it should be really bad, but it's not that jarring when you look at it. The knees flare out a bit, which you can see, and there's not very much depth, but he transfers it backwards and rotationally pretty nicely, which kind of makes up for it. Here we have another 1 foot, which is just his best way of landing, and this one looks good. Pretty clean landing here. Just transferring that backwards, landing backwards, going into a backwards run, kind of landing in a lunge motion, which is fine. Here we have a pretty nice actual rotational landing for me. It looks like, I mean, I go into a run and I get a decent amount of depth. So this is a mix of vertical, horizontal, and rotational transference. And it's one of the best landings in here by me, actually, I think. Just looks surprisingly smooth for an almost forward-facing landing. Alright, I hate this landing by Chandler. It's just flat. I mean, there's kind of depth, but he lands in depth already. It's just kind of like, bam, right? It's not really the best landing here. So he's also leaning a bit forward, as you can see. So I think this would be an opportunity for a cat landing, actually, which is something we should definitely practice. Okay. Finally back to a nice squat landing. You can see my right hand hits the ground here as I'm rotating such that I'm leaning towards my right side, and otherwise I'm probably going to fall over to the right side. So yeah, I'm also rotating a little bit more than 180 degrees, as you can see, or rather the 90 degrees in the air. Here's a horrible landing by me. Finally some bad ones. And it's from the same angle that I'm producing the bad ones. I'm trying to calf raise out of this landing, which is just a bad way to go, obviously. I mean, it's nice to have strong calves and lower legs so you can when the situation comes up, but it's better to just avoid the situation. Alright, here's actually a really nice squat into back landing. You get a new angle, seeing me do the push-off so that I can transfer this slow vertical descent into a horizontal slide by using my arms. This is probably the most useful angle of that. So yeah, vertical, horizontal slide. And then we have our last landing in here, which is a calf raise landing. So you should check out the other video where I kind of go through how it works and explain some of the terminology here. If you've made it all the way to the end. If you made it all the way to the end, you should leave a comment also, because be surprised if more than like a couple people did it. So that's energy efficient basketball. Landing's super important. I care about it. So you want to jump higher, you got to knock